Wait, hold there. Brent here, Bring Your Own Tools, and on today's episode, if you want to see how we completely transform this entire deck from this to this. If you want to learn how to do it, keep on watching. Let's get started.
I've seen plenty of decks in my day, and each one of them has their very own unique personality. Unfortunately with this one, it is a rough personality because we have rotten deck boards, we have a loose railing, we have a roof that has got to go, so let's get right to it. I live in the beautiful Pacific Northwest, which means we get plenty of rain, but which also means we get plenty of moss. And this moss is particularly one of the reasons why we have some rot on the deck, due to the fact that it has clogged the gutter system and therefore our downspouts are obsolete. Luckily for us though, this roofline system actually was very structurally sound and was very easy to remove by unscrewing a few screws on both sides and removing each panel one by one. After we had all of our roof panels removed, it was safe to remove the structural support beam. However, I've never seen one of these systems before in my life, and therefore I just took a reciprocating saw to it, and it turned out that there was an aluminum channel in there for structural support. We carefully lowered the structure down to the deck, and then made it more manageable by cutting it into pieces with, again, the reciprocating saw. This is one of my all-time favorite tools, and if you do have a demolition project, make sure you have one on hand. This also came in extremely handy when removing this custom steel roof frame that was next to the other roofing system. The railing was actually more satisfying to remove than anything else because it was so easy to remove. All it took was a couple strikes with a sledgehammer and cut it into more manageable sections, then moved it to the large dumpster that we rented for a week. Now this dumpster is an added cost, but it's so beneficial for a large sizable demolition project like this, so if you're able to get one, I highly suggest doing so. Now it's finally time for the deck removal portion of this project, and it is always important to have the proper tools on hand. I highlight an area for our walkway because I do want to make sure we have structurally sound boards all the way across as we're removing the majority of our deck boards. I grab my circular saw, set the appropriate depth, which is the exact depth of our existing deck boards, and then start running that all the way across our decking. I cut each panel in more manageable sections, which makes it a lot easier to remove, as well as manage to get it into the dumpster. I have a couple different crowbars on hand, but the one that I use the most for this demolition is this wrecking bar. This actually does an amazing job at removing each panel because it rests upon the joist, and then it has two prongs on either side, which provides an extremely strong pivot point for this wrecking bar to remove each panel extremely easy. Since I'm not able to get super close to the house with the circular saw, I do grab my reciprocating saw to remove those excess boards that are right adjacent to the house or doorway. As I'm removing all of this old decking, it becomes very apparent that the majority of all of our nails are staying within our joists and not the deck boards. That's because these joists are actually in very good shape, and the decking at this point is so soft that it's just going straight through our deck boards. There's a bit of a pro and con here because that means that our joists are actually very structurally sound and we can actually salvage them, but that also means that we have to personally hand remove every single nail on these joists.
And there you have it. The decking board's almost fully complete. We left this nice little walkway here so we can actually walk down. And unfortunately, there is a few sections of rot that we're just gonna have to get taken care of here shortly, replaced along with this board. So we first need to get rid of it.
The rim joist that I'm removing is easily done with a few whacks with a sledgehammer, and that's because it's just surface nailed to the very front of each joist. I did originally want to salvage the majority of the rim joist, but after removing this one section, I just decided to make it easier on ourselves and remove the remaining rim joist across the entire front of the deck. Plus, this means our framing at the very front will stay consistent all the way across. After I removed any of the old nails, it's now time to reinstall a new rim joist. Now this is 2x8 12-footer pressure treated lumber, and I'm using 3-inch long ring shank galvanized nails in my framing nailer to nail it off completely. The one thing to keep in mind when nailing off your rim joists, especially with the fact that we're salvaging these joists themselves, is to make sure that the rim joist is the same height as every other joist. If they're not and they don't line up at the same elevation, you may have some issues with installing the decking because the deck boards are going to have to accommodate the ups and downs of the joists. Luckily for us, we really didn't have many issues here due to the fact that all these joists were previously installed with high quality lumber, so we really didn't have much fluctuation. However, we did have one particular one that gave me some trouble, and I'll show you later on in the video what we did to accommodate the height variance. With any new piece of pressure treated lumber, you do want to apply a wood preservative to any of the areas that you cut due to the fact that this pressure treated solution doesn't always soak into the entire board. That way we can push the longevity of this lumber as long as possible. I cut this specific blocking for areas where the rim joists are butting up next to each other because this could be considered a weak point due to the fact that each piece is connected to only a mere 3/4 of lumber, and therefore with an added 1.5-inch piece on each side, they have plenty of room to be nailed to. Now, in order to have the nicest and cleanest look possible for our deck, we're going to do a picture frame around the entire perimeter of our deck. But that also means that we have to add a bit more framing to the structure, which we'll be doing now. I know the actual width of our decking is 5.5 inches, but we do have 1/2-inch fascia boards that we're going to be installing, which is why I'm making a mark at 5 inches at this location. That's going to be the center point of the two joists that I'm going to be nailing together because I want a full board supporting the perimeter deck board, but I also want a full board supporting the very end of all the other boards, which you'll see in much more video detail later on in this video series. That 5-inch framing mark that I did previously is centered right in between those two joists and then nailed off as needed. In order to connect these new joists appropriately to the ledger board that's connected to the house, we have to install these joist hangers to the ledger board. A palm nailer is a perfect tool to use to get into these very tight-knit applications, and I'm applying 1.5-inch long galvanized nails into the ledger board and 3-inch long nails into the side of our joists.
Okay, so this is our center point right here. With our center point divider, which means we have 14.5 inches from that mark right there, and we have 14.5 inches from all the way over there to here as well. And we have to have two joists right here, as well as the joist over here and here for the divider boards.
The doubled up joists at these locations are exactly the same as I showed previously. However, the one caveat here is the fact that all these joists are resting on a large beam. And because we're commingling old joists with the new joists, we might have to adjust the bottom of these joists to make sure that the height is consistent all the way across. That's where this amazing little electric hand planer comes into play, because I'm easily able to remove any excess thickness with this hand planer and then wiggle our joists into the appropriate location with a few love taps. For clarity purposes on why we did this, the existing joists are approximately 7.25 inches thick, where the new joists are actually 7.5 inches thick. This is an unfortunate circumstance when having to deal with an existing deck. However, the hand planer is actually super satisfying to use and makes quick work of this issue. After I have both pairs of double up joists taken care of, I then nail them off in place and install the appropriate hangers on the opposite side and make my way over to our final two doubled up joist locations. Now, I know there are a lot of tools and materials needed for a project like this, which is why I do have a list in the description box below. So if you need to purchase any of these items, please check out the link in the description box below. But also remember, if you don't want to purchase, you can always rent these at your local tool rental shop as needed. After I plane down the last remaining doubled up joist, I then position it accordingly into this small little corner, nail it off appropriately, and we can finally move on to blocking. There is plenty of blocking needed for an installation like this, especially with the fact that we have a picture frame system. I first start off by cutting small strips of blocking and position them every 16 inches on center. Now I'm making a mark at every 16-inch mark and then securing them in place with exterior screws and construction adhesive. Any construction adhesive that can be used exteriorly should work out just fine, and I'm using Power Pro fasteners that are 3 inches long for full security. In order to reach this blocking on the opposite side where it's doubled up joist, I do use 4-inch long screws, just so you know. All this blocking might seem overkill, which it might be. However, to avoid any movement over time, especially at these locations, which would be considered a weak point, you want to make sure you have plenty of structural support and blocking as needed to avoid any movement down the road. Throughout the rest of the deck, we need a row of blocking down the center of our deck. Now, because our deck is 12 feet deep, we have center support blocking down the middle at 6 feet. But keep in mind that 6 feet is probably the max that you want for center support blocking, so if you have a deck that's deeper than this, you may need to apply multiple rows of blocking. I'm mainly using my framing nailer to secure all this blocking, but in very tight-knit areas where your nailer can't get to, I use 4-inch long exterior screws. I stagger this blocking right on our 6-foot mark because it becomes much easier to install this row of blocking with your nail gun, as you can imagine. After I have this entire row done, I then finish up our short blocking at every 16 inches on center for all of our divider boards. All of these joists are toe-nailed to the large beam right underneath it, but in order to bring this deck into the 21st century, we want to make sure we're attaching hurricane ties. This properly secures our joist to the beam, and with a palm nailer and 1.5-inch long galvanized nails, you're quickly and easily able to secure each one of these joists to the beam with something that's inexpensive and very easy to do. In areas where there's multiple joists attached to each other, I do install a side-mounted hurricane tie, which is sufficient for this application, but no, the majority of the hurricane ties that we install are these single bracket U-shaped hurricane ties. The one thing that I really didn't want to do on this project, but I felt I had to do, was to replace this 4x4 post. Due to the faulty gutter system, water was draining on this section for years and damaging the overall structure of it. Therefore, I felt like we had to remove it, which we did. Luckily for us, this post was located on the far side of the deck, and I knew there wasn't a ton of weight being distributed on this location. But we obviously have to transition the weight accordingly, which is why I beefed up the beam with a couple 2x4s and then removed any of these old galvanized nails with my reciprocating saw. Just realized that these nails really don't want to come out, which is why I eventually destroyed this blade. I completely removed the old post and then reinstall a brand new bracket system. Now this is an adjustable height post base, which is important, but before I actually set it in place, I fill our hole with anchor epoxy. Now this is a 2-part anchor epoxy system, which becomes an extremely secure bond, and then insert our post base right into it. After that, I then measure our post, cut our post, and secure it as needed. Now the reason why it's nice to have an adjustable post base is with the help of your crescent wrench and a slight turn, you can adjust up or down as needed. Once you have it level, you can then secure it, and I do use galvanized screws at this location. Right above this post, we have a bit of a situation though. Previously, I noted that there was going to be one joist that actually had to plane down, and this is it. This specific one is due to the gutter system that was faulty, and therefore this was actually getting way more moisture than everyone else. Luckily for us though, this thing was not falling apart due to rot, which is why I just grabbed my electric hand planer and planed down the surface in order to get everything fully leveled out. Now that we got this taken care of, we can move on to more blocking. Yep, we're going to be doing some blocking specifically for the post base. Now we're going to have a glass railing on this, which I'm really excited about, but we need to guarantee that wherever that glass railing bracket is, we have some type of blocking underneath it. And that's why I'm adding blocking at every single corner of the deck, because I know for certain that's exactly where one of our posts is going to be located. I secure each piece of blocking with construction adhesive and exterior screws, and I will be eventually adding a bit more blocking around the perimeter of the deck, but I don't exactly know where each post base is going to be located, and therefore once I do, I will add that at that time. Due to the fact that we're utilizing exterior joists, we have to actually do a bit of cleanup because these joists are dirty. The previous decking boards must have had an exterior polyurethane finish because there's drips everywhere and therefore all those drips gotta go. I also grab a sanding block to knock off all the dust and scuff up the existing surface so we're ready for stain. Now I would normally not use a stain, however, there is a very unique light blue stain applied to all of the existing joists and it just looks awful in all honesty, which is why I grabbed this Storm exterior stain which can be applied with a roller and brush. This company does have a color chart, but I personally just asked for the blackest black they could find, and that's what we applied. You do want to have some type of painter sheet or plastic sheathing underneath so it catches any drips and it doesn't fall on anything below, but the really nice thing about this stain is that it's so thick, and because it's so thick, it actually doesn't drip nearly as much as a normal stain would. We're using stain over paint for a couple of different reasons. Number one being, of course, is the fact that stain really doesn't peel on you compared to paint over time. As well as the fact that this stain can be applied to pressure treated wood, which is not always the case with other paints. This stain can also be applied to metal, which is really nice because it provides an overall nice aesthetic, but it also makes it nice because I don't have to cut in every single one of these brackets, which would take a lot longer to do. I apply this stain everywhere, whether it's a beam, bracket, joist, post, and so forth. However, the one area that I don't apply it to is the very top surface of every single joist, and that's because we're going to be using some joist tape.
This is ProTack by TimberTech, and it is specifically for flashing and joist tape. Now this goes right on top of our existing joists, and we do this because of the fact that we're using composite decking. And composite decking actually lasts longer than our joists. We want to make sure these joists last as long as possible, which is why we're going to be applying our joist tape at this point and then putting our decking right on top of it. So let's get to it.
This joist tape comes in two different thicknesses, one being 2.5 inches and the other one being 4 inches. And there is a sizable difference, but it's for good reason, because the single individual joist will get the 2.5, but our doubled up joist will have a 4-inch applied, which does save time since you're only applying one strip versus two. One thing we haven't discussed yet is the flashing that actually is against the house. Now this is a metal strip of flashing, and you do want to make sure that tape is tucked underneath that specific flashing. Think of it like gravity would think of it, because once that water hits the deck, it's going to get on top of the metal flashing, then you want it to roll off the flashing onto the tape, and then off the tape down onto the ground. At least in theory, of course. The ProTack is an amazing joist tape, and it actually extends the life of your decking substrate, it prevents water penetration, and it also protects the lumber from rot. And this is a huge factor these days because the majority of the decking that we're installing these days is composite decking, which lasts longer than traditional joists. With that being said, I want to thank TimberTech for producing such an amazing product, but also being the sponsor of this week's video. TimberTech produces the best looking composite decking in my personal opinion, and they not only produce amazing colors and textures to choose from for your decking, but they also produce amazing railings, porches, lighting, dry spaces, and accessories. If you want to check out their amazing lineup to choose from, then check out the link in the description box below. With the application of this joist tape, the one thing you have to realize is the fact that this stuff is extremely sticky. Once you remove that barrier on the back side, it can stick to almost near anything. And also remember that be careful on these joists. It is a bit unique and treacherous to try and walk on all these joists perfectly every single time, but we certainly don't want to fall. So be careful when applying this product or any other time that you find yourself on top of joists that is high above the ground. But now with the joist tape taken care of, we are done with part 1 of this amazing transformation. So much work has been put into this deck just to get it to this point, but as you can see, it is an amazing transformation and I cannot wait to show you how we get to this point in next week's video. But till then, just know it's one beautiful, sexy beast of a transformation. Oh yeah,